This show is a part of the FM Podcast Network, the home of great music podcasts. Visit us at fmpods.com.
We're back in Boston for the second of 3 episodes in the Boston Sessions. In this episode, I talked to author, scholar, educator, and friend John Radosta about his scholarly work with collaborator Keith Nainby, his extraordinary short stories and novels, film noir, and of course, how all of this connects to Bob Dylan and to the ideas in Dylan's work. Welcome to another episode of Infinity Goes Up on Trial. I'm your host, Erin Callahan, and today I'm with the prolific writer, educator, and all-around amazing person, John Radosta. Thank you for being with me, John.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm excited to sit down with you. We had a Zoom conversation months ago where we chatted about your writing, and now we get to do this officially and on camera. Wonderful. So you are a prolific writer, and I would love to talk about first your academic work that you do with your partner, writing partner Keith Nainby, and we have that in common. I don't necessarily write as much with Court as you guys really write cohesively. Court and I mostly co-edit, and we write a few things, but I'm always impressed and just in awe of the work that you guys do. So you and Keith co-authored the book Bob Dylan in Performance, Song, Stage, and Screen in 2019. And I'll put a link in the show notes so folks can go buy it.
Thank you.
Of course. It's a fantastic analysis of Dylan using performance theory. And it opened up new ways for me to kind of think about Dylan, especially since I think performance is such an important part of Dylan's work. And you know that. You contributed a wonderful chapter to the Set List book, so thanks for that. But for folks who haven't read it, will you share a bit about your process?
Sure. Well, Keith and I both had tons of ideas, and it was fun because he's in California, I'm in Boston.
Maybe we should start by saying how you guys met and how you started writing together.
Well, we were college roommates at Boston University.
Right.
And I and another roommate of mine, Matt, were already huge Dylan fans, and then Keith came along, and we got him into the cult as well. Yes. And so that's how we got him involved. And then he went off to become an academic, and he was writing articles. I went off to be a teacher and was writing crime novels, bizarrely.
Which we will talk about.
Okay. And so actually it started that Keith was offered the contract to write the book when he was here in Boston. And I saw him for dinner afterwards, and he's like, I'm going to write this book, except I've never written a book. You have to write it with me. And I'm like, I'd love to, but I write crime novels. That just you saying that is like, it's Keith's energy. I can hear him saying that. Can't you? Yes. That's so funny. So I love our teamwork because he's all of these ideas, and I'm the 9th grade English teacher, and I'm kind of keeping him to task. And we talked about that when we met in Tulsa. So we met face to face in Tulsa last May 2023, and we realized that sort of you and I are similar personalities, and Court and Keith are similar, because Court is very boisterous. He has tons of ideas. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant, and I'm grateful to work with him. But you and I are more like on task, and sometimes Court and I go back and forth with that, but I think you and I are more like introverted. Definitely. Yeah. I'm very introverted, actually. Yeah. But that's why the writing is so great. And so Keith and I communicate like that all the time, and we've worked on the Set List book for you, and we're doing other things together, and it's just so much fun working with him. I love that. It is fun to work with another person because it does kind of keep you honest, but it also helps generate new ideas because you're not stuck in your own mind. Yeah, and I can see it's for me, it's great to work with Court because he is such a different personality that it helps to kind of bring me out of my shell a little bit. So performance obviously is central to Dylan's art, but what made you decide to write about it? Well, other than Keith dragging me into it. Yeah. Well, I'd always been a huge fan, and I never actually stopped to think about why. I just loved the music. I loved to listen to him sing. I loved the lyrics. I loved everything, but I'd never actually had to justify it, I guess, or put it into words. And so writing it out helped me to understand why I love Dylan. I'm still learning, but it's been a lot of fun just, actually analyzing lines finding those literary allusions and things like that. That's basically what I brought. Keith is much more performance, and he's looking at it even at the phonemic level. I'm looking at the more literary level. And so I think we pair very well together, but I finally got to put into words those exciting things that kept me up at night, just listening.
I think that's the process too, that writing about Dylan, I mean, it's fun. Let's just be honest. Like, we get to write about something that we love, exactly. And we get to then, add sort of an intellectual bent to something that we have so much passion for, which to me is just like, could there be anything better? But what did you learn about the connection that you have to Dylan through writing that book? There's my curveball question. It wasn't on the list, folks.
So the connection is just that Dylan seems to take everything in. And that's what I've really learned to love about him. At school I teach The Odyssey, one of my all-time favorite books. I teach a lot of Shakespeare, and I've come to realize that Dylan really is part of that. He takes in the entire culture and just sucks it all up and then spits it back out to us in a new way. And as a writer, I get to take in everything that I've ever done. And even if it's in a completely different context, I put in these little details and I realize that's what Dylan's doing all the time. And the more I listen, the more I read, the more I realize, oh my goodness, like all of these great lines, they're not even his. He's taking them from this, 18th century poem. He's taking it from this, from the Odyssey, from everything. He just puts it all together and it looks shiny and new. And so I just love being able to find those little details. Scott
Wormuth does such a good job picking out those references for us as well. But I know, and if you have a literary brain too, I mean, it goes back to the Odyssey sort of. Laura Tentrick just did her presentation on the hero's journey, and she used part of in Dylan's hero's journey, and he says that in No Direction Home, that he's basically, he was born very far from where he was.
He's always been going home.
Yeah, and then, long come traveling late, long coming home. Like, it's just, it all kind of comes together. And the fact that he has such a consciousness about how it all is working together at this point in the late stage is just pure genius. So let me ask the next question. The book is broken up into formations and transformations, which I love. It makes me think of Visions and Revisions, T.S. Eliot. But what made you think of that? The idea of like the formation of maybe Dylan's oeuvre and then the transformations of it.
So it goes back to that idea of like taking everything in. So, like what he said in his Nobel speech, the idea of, he had to learn that vernacular, and he had to get all of those words down. And I don't know if it was the Nobel speech or maybe the Music Cares one where he says, if you would, listen to all of these songs, you'd be writing this too.
I think it's Music Cares. Okay. I was just going to say, when you said Nobel, I was going to say, it almost reminds me of the Music Cares speech as well, where it shows the consistency and where he's telling you what his influences are.
Right. And so we wanted to just say where he got all of this stuff. And so it's, pulling it all in and just putting it back out. But when he puts it back out, it's like he's refracting everything. You can still see those pieces, but they're in different contexts, they're in different places, everything sounds differently. And so that's the idea. Like, you listen to a song and like, I didn't know much about the blues, but you hear that great line in Tempest. He was going down slow and like, oh, that comes from this, or I was down on the killing floor and oh, I didn't know that. But so every single time I find something in Dylan that I really like, it turns out that it comes from somewhere else, and so I get deeper into the culture. I know more, and so I'm constantly on that journey every time I listen to a Dylan song.
That's really cool. He played the Killing Floor when I saw him in Chicago.
Did he?
Yeah, he played. The first night he opened with Born in Chicago, and everybody went nuts. And I was not born in Chicago, so I loved it, but I didn't have the same connection. I think if he broke out with Jersey Girl or something, I might lose my mind, but he's never doing that.
You never know.
Yeah, that's true. I shouldn't say never. But he did play, I think it was the second night he played the Killing Floor, and we all went nuts, of course. But maybe it was the first night. I can't. It's all blending together. But there is something to that he is. He is part of Western culture, and the filtering all of that through. Now I feel like Susie Rotolo in No Direction Home, where he kind of takes in everything around him, and everything around him is what, part literature, music, and whatnot, and it just does filter through. I wonder if you think that he went through that process where he would listen to something and then go, well, where did that come from? And it brought him down the road to other music, other texts and whatnot.
I imagine he'd have to have done. I mean, you can't know about these connections unless you follow those threads.
Right.
And that's, very much the way I look at it. Like it's, Homer was a rhapsode. It's a Greek word meaning weaver. He would weave everything together. And I think Dylan is very consciously doing that. I think he knows exactly what those threads are.
Which is so beautiful, because when you said that, it made me think of Penelope, of weaving and unweaving. And Dylan is unweaving, but then reweaving back into his own work.
Exactly.
Yeah. We've just come up with something. Maybe we should write about it.
We have to.
No, now we're compelled. So what would you like Dylan fans, either the obsessives like us, or casual fans who read the book, what do you want them to take away from it?
I think the most important thing would be that we all are obsessed with Dylan, and we all hear a different thread in there, or a different string being played, and you can't find enough threads. And so these are ours, you have yours, and the more of these different threads we put together, the better picture we're going to get of Dylan. I think people say, oh, I love his words, but, I can't listen to his voice. I'd rather listen to a Peter, Paul and Mary version or something like that. And I'm like, but that's only part of it. That's like saying, oh, I love to read the ingredients in a recipe. Like, you actually have to make it. And, that's what Dylan is.
That's so wonderful. Like, I like to read the ingredients, but I don't want to make the thing. I don't want to taste it. Yeah, that's fantastic, because that is, and he said himself that in the Nobel speech that he wants people to listen to, whether you're seeing him live or streaming, or he said however people listen to music these days, that they're not meant to be read. They're meant to be experienced in performance, which then speaks to the importance of your work.
Exactly.
And I love, maybe now I can jump to the coda, because I love that coda on your book where you talk about your first experience. And so maybe we should talk about your first experience seeing Dylan, because that fits into the performance. So,
well, the first time I saw him was in '86 with Tom Petty.
So jealous.
And it was amazing. It was actually, I was lucky because it was the third time that summer he had come to Boston, and I had missed him obviously the first two times. And it was a brand new venue at the time. They were having terrible traffic jams getting in and out. And I remember reading the review.
It was at Mansfield,
It was in Mansfield. And I, we'll be going there this week too for that's going to be my 51st show. Wow. I think 51, something like that. But anyhow, I remember reading a review saying that his version of Knocking on Heaven's Door was so good that people literally levitated out of the parking lot, that there were no parking lot problems that night. And so, there were all these songs I didn't know. I'd only started listening to him 2 years before, and there was no internet, there was no iTunes, nothing. So I could only listen to various things that I could scrounge up. And he just put on this amazing show. Songs I didn't know, but it was only much, much later that I realized that was his low point.
I was going to say, and what an interesting year to see him too in '86, because you're going to write an essay for the '80s book, and that Court and I are editing, and I just think it's so funny that when I started to want to write about the '80s, people laughed at me and said there's nothing good in the '80s.
I don't believe that at all.
I don't either, clearly. And Court was one of the few people who took me seriously. And I'm grateful for that, because I'm like, there's something there that we cannot go from what was great to then get to Time Out of Mind. There's something in the middle that connects those. And so I'm so grateful that other people wanted to write about it, and that you and Keith, we can talk about what you're writing about. But the fact that that's your entry point makes it even more special, because you have a particular connection to it.
Yeah, I mean, actually my entry point, the first time I even heard him, was through We Are the World. And
that's what I'm writing about.
Oh, I can't wait to see what you have to say.
We'll talk about that at dinner.
I was watching like Huey Lewis or whatever, and I said to my father, like, who is that old weirdo?
Right.
And he gave me his mono copy of Highway 61. And that was it.
I think there are a lot of dads that we must thank for getting us into Bob Dylan, because I'm not sure many of us got in through our moms, because my dad gave me Dylan's lyrics and said, "Take this, brother, may it serve you well." And I'm like, clearly it has. But yeah, I think a lot of our dads were like, here's the thing you should have. But I remember him too. I remember focusing on 3 people: Springsteen, Jersey, Ray Charles, and Bob Dylan. Those are the 3 folks I was most focused on.
That is a great trio.
Thank you. And the other people I was like, Michael Jackson was okay. Like, I always liked Michael Jackson, but those 3 were just, I knew that there was something. So We Are the World was your entry point. Your dad gave you the mono of Highway 61. So, and then were you hooked?
I was hooked.
Yeah.
It was on Tombstone Blues. When I heard the line, "The sun's not yellow, it's chicken." I'm like, I get that pun. There's something going on here.
That's great. What a great line to get into. All right, so you went to Mansfield, and it was it transformative?
It was.
Okay.
It absolutely was. And knocking on heaven's door, really, just that day. I actually, watching the Hard to Handle video, I almost missed a plane because I needed to listen to that just one more time.
That's amazing. I love that. All right, so let's talk about your creative work. Unless you want to share with us what you were going to write for the 80s book, because I want to talk about that maybe a little bit too, because that's still academic. Or no, or are we?
Sure, I could share. I mean, Keith and I are, double teaming on this again. It's so much fun. Our basic idea is that this was a time, and not the only time in his career, that Bob kind of sat back and was gathering the threads together again. We think of it as he was kind of cleaning out the attic. So he was looking at what his different influences were. He was trying to pull them together, looking for that new sound. In the same way that, at Woodstock, they found that Americana. He was going back to those same roots and, just kind of reminding himself where he came from. You can't go anywhere unless you know where you've been. And so he was just kind of husbanding his resources.
That's cool.
And I don't believe actually that any of it was really bad. I mean, first of all, when you're talking about how bad the 80s were, you're really only talking about Knocked Out Loaded, maybe Empire Burlesque, and Down in the Groove, and some bad live performances. But in '86 with Tom Petty, he was at least as much of a professional that he could at least put on a good show, even if he wasn't feeling it. And those 3 albums aren't so bad. And 3 albums in 10 years, that's not that much. You start with Infidel, actually with was it Shot of Love? And then you have Infidels, and you end with Oh Mercy. The 80s weren't bad at all. Like, give the guy a break.
I know, and I think, but that's the narrative, and I wanted to challenge that narrative that the 80s are just this nadir in his nadir in his career, but there's really wonderful stuff there, and all the Wilbury stuff as well. Yeah. His songs and the humor in his songs are some of my favorite songs from those albums. All right, so let's shift to your creative work. I'm eager to talk about this. So, what drew you to the crime genre?
So we already talked about the fact that, I'm a good rule follower. I've always been a good boy. But I've always liked mysteries. And I've always liked, the idea that I could be doing something naughty, but I can't. And so, like, when I was in 4th grade at my Catholic school, I found a James Bond book. And so I got hooked on James Bond at a Catholic elementary school. I don't know what the nuns were thinking. But I've just always really enjoyed, at least vicariously exploring all of these things that I can't do. Even as a teacher, I'm afraid to go to the principal's office.
That's so funny.
I think that's why I write that stuff. It's all the things that I can't do.
That's so, I find that fascinating. I describe myself as a rule follower. I said, I'll follow your rules unless I think they're illogical, and then I won't follow them.
Oh, I might even follow those too. That's
really?
how bad I am.
That's God bless. All right, so it gives you a space, sort of like you can create a persona, and through that persona, very T.S. Eliot, through that persona, you can do something that you would never do in your real life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
and
wonderful.
So, I even have a pseudonym. It started out because my first crime novel, it's my first novel, I was told it was well written, but stomach turning.
Why stomach turning?
Oh, it was pretty graphic. I mean, it's like the worst night ever.
Okay.
And so
now you need to tell us more about this.
Okay.
And we're linking it in the show notes so people can buy it.
Well, it's because I love all these different things. Mostly, what I do in my noir writing is I take Greek myths and I update them.
Yes.
And so that first one is called Night of the Furies, and what happens in the original story is Orestes kills his mother Clytemnestra because she killed Agamemnon, and the Furies pursue him. And so my book is The Night of the Furies. It's set here in Boston in the 30s. And Giorgio's father is a crime boss. And so it's the same story except with the mafia. And it's the worst night ever. And he loses a hand, he finds out all horrible things. It's a Greek myth. So my wife said, you can't possibly have this book and have the parents of your students know, or even some of your family know that.
Yeah.
So I've toned down, I think, but I still keep the pseudonym anyhow.
That's amazing. I think it's so great because I know you as such a gentle and kind soul that to see what comes out of your imagination is it's fantastic.
We'd been married, I think, 13 years when that book came out.
Yeah.
And my sister-in-law said, "Who did my sister marry?" I'm like, just geeky me. Like, that's all it was.
It's my imagination.
It's all it was.
Yeah, that's so, and I think it makes me think of this, that when I took my cousin who is now a surgeon in Boston, when they were little, I took them to see the R&J, the modern adaptation, the Baz Luhrmann adaptation of R&J. Okay. And I remember thinking, oh my God, it's so violent. There's so much gunplay, and my aunt and uncle are going to kill me. And then I thought, well, this is really, you think about them drawing swords, it's that level of violence, but it's just for us, the swords aren't shocking because it's not the modern weapon we use.
Right.
And so maybe, the Furies is just that violent, but we're thinking of it with such detachment that when you put it in a modern setting and you put the same stuff, now you seem like a crazy person,
right.
But you're not, you're just putting it in the same shocking amount of violence, but it's a way that people understand violence.
That this is really bad stuff.
In a contemporary way.
Yeah.
So it's not really, it's the Greeks did it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's
all
not
them.
you. You're just interpreting it. You're finding the threads. All right, so months ago, as I said, we had that wonderful Zoom conversation. I touched my mic. I was so happy, so grateful for your time, but you talked about rideshare, which was I love that story, and it was really creepy. So will you tell us, again, with your permission, we'll link it.
Sure.
I'm all about getting your work out there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There are so many people writing awful things right now, or who are doing not great writing, or saying awful things. We need to have all the good writing as available as possible. So will you tell them, I've read it, but the people who are listening or watching, will you tell them about it, please?
Well, it's the story of, a nosy neighbor, and he sees that his next door neighbor is in a pretty abusive relationship. And one day her boyfriend just shows up as he's getting into the car and says, I know that you work near where I work, so you need to drive me to my work. I lost my license. And the character is a high school guidance counselor, rule follower, and this actually happened to me. Like, my next door neighbor said, "You're going to drive me to work," and there was nothing bad about that. But I thought, wow, what would happen? And so in the story, things just get progressively worse. Once you do something nice for somebody, how do you back out of it? And you can't. And it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Especially someone who doesn't say, will you drive me to work? It just says, you are driving me to work. Was there a question there?
There is none whatsoever, you know.
Right.
And he says, you know, this is better than Uber. He tells the, you know, poor guidance counselor, this is, of course it is, because you're not paying for it.
Right.
You're just going to drive me.
And there's no record of where you've been.
There's no record, and you're going to be my drug mule, and it just, every step.
With the duffel bags in the trunk and all of the things, and that, yeah, it's so good. So one of the strongest aspects of that writing was the character, the suspense building. Because I was just like, who's getting killed? Like, what's going to happen?
Someone has to die.
I know, that was the thing. I'm like, is it going to be the guidance counselor? Is he going to turn? It was so good. And so how do you do that? I mean, I was rapt reading it. I loved it.
Well, thank you. I don't know. I can't tell you that part. I wish I could. Every once in a while, a really good ending occurs to me. Sometimes I will search for years for a good ending.
Right.
But that one, I wrote that story maybe 10 years after the initial "you're going to drive me to work" conversation I had.
Did it stay with you?
Oh, it always stayed with me.
It's so odd.
A lot of my stories are based on things that happened when I was very, very young, and they've just stayed.
Right.
And I have to get them out. So I think once I realized who this guidance counselor was, you know, why he was always being such a nosy guy, he needed to do something. And that's a lot of my stories, because I don't do anything.
Right.
I never break a rule. But this guy was called upon to do something that he needed to do, that needed to be done.
Yeah. It's sort of, and I think the character development too is also my other favorite part. But the way you build suspense is just, it does put me on edge the whole time, because I knew it was coming. I just didn't know who and when. And the fact that you can keep that hidden until we have that turn is incredibly skillful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. When did you start writing? Were you a kid? Like, this is what I'm going to do? Okay.
My mother always told me, and maybe this is why even though I'm not musical at all, I write so much about music.
Right.
My mother tells me that I used to always be attracted to what she called dead songs. Not the Grateful Dead, just songs about dead people. So one of my first favorite songs was Ray Peterson, I think that was his name, "Tell Laura I Love Her." Okay. You know that song?
I don't.
Oh, it's horrible.
We should link it in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a story song from the 50s, and this guy is in love with Laura, and he wants to buy her a diamond ring, but he has no money, and it just so happens that there's a car race this weekend, and the prize money is exactly as much as the amount for the ring. And nobody knows what happened that day, how his car flipped over in flames. But as they pulled him from the dying wreck, they heard him say, "Tell Laura I love her, tell Laura I need her." And so I was writing basically, you know, how they met when I was in like second grade. You know, that yellow paper where you learn how to write? I was like kneeling on the back, because, you know, who has, you know, seat belts in the 70s, right? No. Kneeling on the back of the car in the back seat, writing out how they met. That was my very first story.
That's amazing.
And then pretty soon after that, I was writing, we wrote a play in second or third grade, Scar Wars, and we were going to perform that. It seemed like we rehearsed it all year long, but it was probably for like 2 or 3 recesses. But I've always been a writer.
It's amazing how you're in your imagination. It's like, all year we practiced this, and you're like, maybe it was 3 recesses. Yeah. What recesses? What was Scar Wars about?
Oh, Scar Wars was about
picturing the Star Wars Scarface mashup.
Well, no, it wasn't that violent. But I had seen, I think, I don't know, some kind of a parody on TV. But I had like Princess Leaper and Luke Sleepwalker, and I don't know. It was probably like 3 pages long, but
that's great. Do you still have it?
No, I wish I did.
I wish you did too. Not that we would link it in the show notes, but we would definitely have to have a performance. So one of the reasons that I'm doing this whole endeavor, and hopefully it will all come together, is that I want to look at how Dylan influences, or the ideas, in a very Jungian way, how Dylan is dealing with ideas that are out in the world, and to bring, you know, sort of some sort of understanding, like you were saying, bring the threads together. Yeah. And you're writing your book, you and Keith wrote, you discuss film noir, and I wanted to talk to you about, and your crime writing obviously fits with this. So let's talk about Dylan and film noir.
Yeah.
And so it is one of his early influences. And so we know he loves movies. And do you think that they're formative or transformative, to use your language, or as formative or transformative as the radio stations he listened to as a kid that would he says they piped in late at night, or listened to blues, bluegrass, R&B, country. Do you think those films were as formative?
I think there'd have to be. I mean, you remember what you see when you're really young. Just all that visual stimuli. It sits with you.
Right.
We all have those memories, and if you're sitting there in a dark theater up on the balcony, just watching these transgressive people, like, again, you're a little kid and you're watching these people break the rules. It's got to have an influence on you.
Do you think he was a rule follower?
Do I think
in the
Bob
way
Dylan
that
was?
we were?
No.
Like,
no, I don't think he ever was.
Yeah, I imagine he was not. Yeah, but I find the relationship to film is so different in the period when he was a child than it is now, and that there weren't the multiplexes, you couldn't stream, and so there has to be something. There's a connection there, I would think. And then
it was work. It was work. Like you had to be very intentional. I'm going to the movies.
Right.
I don't know what I'm going to see. Maybe it's going to be from film reels and cartoons or whatever. Right. But this is an event.
Yeah.
And today movies aren't so much of an event.
They're just sort of another form of entertainment.
Exactly.
Roberta Raycove tells me this story about how her dad, when he was a child, he didn't have enough money to go to the movies, but he loved them so much that when the movies were letting out, he would walk in backwards. So it would just seem like he was part of the crowd. And I love that rule breaking, but it does show there's this, sort of deep connection to the movies, and it is sort of the golden age of Hollywood as well. I wonder too if there's a connection to BH, his great-grandfather who owned and operated the movie theaters there, that there's a familial connection.
There must be.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's like family lore, and this is what great-granddad did, and I would think so.
He's, we know that he loves his family and cherishes his family, and I don't think that's just forward, next generation, but, he loved his mother very much and whatnot. So why do you think film noir?
I think, especially looking at the time that it comes out, that it was a time when America was looking for its own identity, and here he is, a young person looking for his identity. It really appeals to that search, I think. And you just see people making their own decisions. What I like about noir is that it's basically little people making really big mistakes. And, that's a scary thing, but on the other hand, that's how people feel alive too, right? Like, if I'm going to do it, I might as well just go out in a blaze of glory.
Except for the rule followers.
Except for the rule followers. But I remember watching like White Heat with my grandfather.
I watched that with my dad. Top of the world.
Top of the world. And like that, I had never known. I think that was my introduction to film noir because of my grandfather, who actually and this was in my book, Night of the Furies. I have all kinds of family stories in there. But he used to work right downtown here in the 1920s. And this movie theater owner had 3 theaters, but he would only buy 1 movie. And as a film reel was used up, they would pass it on to the next theater. So 1 movie was being shown in 3 theaters almost simultaneously. My grandfather was driving, like literally the wheels are going off the road as he's taking turns. And so, just that connection to how important movies are, that idea of those family stories, I think that really does form a person.
I think you brought up 2 things that I want to follow up on. The idea of America finding its own identity in the post-World War II era. How do you think noir kind of fits with that? Because to me, well, I won't say what I think, but I'm interested to your answer. But also the incredible masculine, I guess, presence in film noir might have spoken to him too, having just come back from the Dylan Masculinity Conference. That just kind of clicked to me that they're, the heroes are so masculine, and that even our influences in getting into film noir, like you got it from your grandfather, for me again, from my dad. Really, I don't realize how influential he was on some of my artistic taste, but how was America kind of carving out its identity in that period?
Well, I think, for any young man, it's just like, he was obviously too young to be in the war, but that was, the paradigm, like this is what a man is. And so he had to find his way, and what else are you going to fight? You can't fight Nazis, you've destroyed them, or so you think. And so what else is there? Isn't that the line in The Wild Ones?
I was just going to say that. We were sharing a brain a little bit today, but
what have you got?
What are you rebelling against? What have you got? He writes about that in Philosophy of Modern Song as well, that kind of struck a chord.
Because every kid has to rebel against something.
Right.
That's the whole hero's journey. You have to fight against whatever was before. And there wasn't a whole lot else for a young white boy to be struggling against. So I think that noir, pointed to, oppressive society and things like that, and really, engineered, I guess, the idea that it's got to be the individual. You have to be the individual.
Right.
And a lot of times it ends tragically because the machine is just too strong. But if you're going to be an individual, that's what you got to do.
And that seems to fit so perfectly. I mean, and what you just said just kind of like sparked an idea that, that quote from Chronicles that I love, and I think many of us love, I just thought of mainstream culture as lame as hell and a big trick. Like, you're right, that's what he's rebelling against. And you see that consistently. And when you said the machine kind of squashes the individual, it ends tragically. But for Dylan, he was able to triumph in that. And so he is his own film noir hero in essence, because he doesn't play the mainstream game. That's amazing. I think you may have just solved it. Film, that's what it is.
Check.
It's like, what? Check. Film noir's disillusionment with mainstream society does align with Dylan's disillusionment with mainstream society and his pushing back and, rebelling against. But I mean, there are big things he's rebelling against in the beginning, civil rights, in the civil rights movement, and even being part of, and as small as it was, the Sun City Project, pushing back against apartheid.
Right.
It just seems to kind of fit. And he does have a certain fascination with outlaws and
he always has,
yes.
Sure.
Yeah, and that kind of fits as well. So I wrote this. A book that I use in my lit and film class includes a description of the film noir hero, and I asked you this. I'm going to say the quote. Whatever his profession, the film noir protagonist is small-time, world-weary, aging, and not classically handsome, though I may contest that.
His eyes are still blue, though.
I know, they are. He's self-destructive and thus fallible, often suffering abuse on the way to a story's conclusion that may very well deny him his goal and will almost certainly leave him unredeemed. So I was reading that. Do you think that fits with Dylan in the 80s when he's using so much of film noir?
I don't know. I mean, self-destructive, certainly fallible. Abuse,
alcohol
I don't know.
And drug abuse
well,
in the 80s?
Yeah, but everyone was doing that, weren't they? Except me.
Yeah.
So,
also not me. I was in grade school, so it seems inappropriate.
But I suppose, I mean, even on a professional level, when he's clearly self-sabotaging some of those albums.
Right.
But he never gave up at the same time.
Right.
And so I like to look at it, one of his favorite movies is Maltese Falcon, clearly.
Yeah.
And I teach that book at school too. And what I love about it is that, Spade knows everything from the very beginning. In that very first scene when Bridget O'Shaughnessy comes in under a different name and sells him this lie, you the reader just go along with it. Oh no, got to save the sister or whatever.
Right.
And he tells her, oh, we didn't believe you. We believed you $200. And he knows the entire score right through the book. And he has to fight off all of these different forces. And I feel like that's what Dylan identifies with. Not so much the little person making big mistakes that you see so often in noir, but this individual who does know the score. And
doesn't he say that? He says that somewhere.
I know
like
the score.
Knowing the score, or I
We'll have to find it for the notes.
We will have to find it for the notes, because I'm almost certain that he says something about like knowing the score or something. It might be in Chronicles, which we can't always trust, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere, which is interesting.
But there is that line in Foot of Pride where he talks about, having to carry a burden too heavy to be yours. And that's the same kind of thing.
Right.
It's just like, I am stuck in the middle of this and I have to control all these different forces, and how am I going to do that?
Right.
And with Spade, you think he's going to lose out, but he says, I'm not going to play the sap for you. And he triumphs, and he does what's right in the end. And that's how I see Dylan in the 80s. And so I think he was more Bogart, Sam Spade, just trying to collect everything. And you didn't, we watching don't always know what's going on, but he had an idea all along, and boom, we get, the 90s and this century.
We get time out of mind, thankfully. But no, it's interesting because I think, the way I look at him, maybe where it fits a little bit more with film noir, and I'm not contradicting, but there is no one who is, they're all aging rock stars, and it's a young man's game, and there's no template of how to do that, especially with the changing technology. And I love that Harold talks about skinny ties and the changing fashion, and MTV coming in, and I do love him dancing in Tight Connection to My Heart. But
which I think is a very noir video.
Right.
It's, it changes, fedoras for trucker caps, but it's very noir.
That's an interesting, there's another paper. But so I do see him sort of struggling to, he's a little bit world weary. He's left Jesus, he's had a divorce. He's with Carolyn Dennis at that point. But I just think that there's something there where he's struggling, and you're right, he perseveres, but maybe he is that film noir kind of guy that, as we just said, he winds up triumphing because he can control the machine. But there's a little bit there. There's a darkness there.
There's definitely a darkness there.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're talking about the young man's game, that goes right back to Brownsville Girl and the gunfighter, and it's all right there.
Yeah. So in your book, you quote Michael Gray's analysis of Dylan's use, and much respect to Michael Gray. And so the question, what end does it serve, quoting, using all of these quotes? And it says, they end up woven into the opaque songs of Empire Burlesque because the bored, middle-aged Dylan, to whom little seems vivid, has been watching them late at night in the pallid glow of the TV set for lack of anything more purposive to do to fill up his time. That's really strong language.
It really is, and it's a beautiful sentence. And I think the sentence is, its own end, because there's no way, you're writing that in what? When did you write that? Mid-90s or something like that? By which time we have the internet and things like that.
Right.
We didn't have any of that in the early 80s.
Right.
You couldn't watch The Late Late Show and say, let me write down all of these lines. You couldn't do that. And he has so many of those lines. I think what it comes out of is VCRs and things like that. And it was a time where you could actually archive the culture that we couldn't do before.
Right.
Before it was, you would be lucky if you caught the Maltese Falcon twice in a year on The Late Late Show.
Right.
You have it on a videotape, you can study it. And that's what he was doing. And so, you start talking about Love and Theft and all of these obscure lines. He was doing that all the way back on Empire Burlesque, because he must have had a VCR
or a beta.
Or beta. I had a beta machine at home, because you needed to be able to go back to that, to find those lines, because it's not like, that occurs to me, let me write it down.
Right.
In Why Bob Dylan Matters, Richard Thomas is talking about how deliberately Dylan is quoting a specific translation of the Odyssey. Right. And it's not just cool lines from the Odyssey. It's always the world-weary Odysseus. It's very specific. And if you go back to those movie quotes, they're not just random cool lines, like, what have you got?
Right.
They're all from these individualists, these people who are trying to say, I know what's going on, or looking to take control, which is what he was doing. And so I think they fit his his mood at the time, but he's not some bored middle-aged guy late at night with nothing to do. This is a man who is trying to restart the engine. And he does. Maybe
he is bored. He's middle-aged, so we can't argue that. And maybe he is bored, but at the same time, you know, it's interesting to think of Dylan, and I love the way you say this, because yesterday Harold Lapidus said to me, he said that Dylan was made for the internet because you could just Google search things and you can look things up, but it's almost a reverse where he's doing that, where he's binge watching these movies, and he has the time and, you know, the resources to do so. And I believe, because I was thinking maybe he did this through scripts, like he was reading scripts, but he's more auditory, and so he probably heard the lines, liked the way they sounded, and was, you know, in his way jotting down notes. So even in his boredom, he's making better use of his time than I am when I'm like binge watching a show because I'm bored, right? It makes me think of the pandemic. I mean, what did he do in lockdown? What did he give us?
Oh my God!
Right.
He gave us Rough and Rowdy Ways. He gave us Shadow King. Like,
Right. Roberta Rakove has an article coming out about Dylan's art in the pandemic. And it's beautiful because he gave us all of that art, but then that helped us feel a sense of community when we were locked down. So it was just, I mean, it's like he does make better use of his time than we do, even when he is in, you know, the bottom, he's binge watching and thinking, I can use that.
Exactly.
And it's amazing. So I did love your response to Michael Gray, and I think you even drew it out even further here that, you know, he's archiving the culture in a way that the technology, where we say he's struggling with the technology, well, he seems to have used it to his advantage. We were talking about this too with Harold. Harold and I were talking about this yesterday, how, you know, now we sound incredibly old, but, you know, I accept, I'm 50. So when, you know, listening, when you were a kid, you said you had to work to go to the movies, and you had to work, like, I don't know if you remember, like I had my little tape recorder, and if a song I liked came on the radio, I'd have to hit record.
That's how I have Tangled Up in Blue, and every time I hear Tangled Up in Blue, I hear the WBCN DJ saying, and there's a guy who, and then I clicked off, I don't know the guy who what? Like, what were you going to say about Dylan?
It's got to be archived somewhere now that you can find it.
I would think so.
Right.
But yeah, that was my version of Tangled Up in Blue for a good 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and all those things, because, you know, if you're a kid and you don't have the money to buy, I remember to buy the album, there were always blank tapes around my house.
Yep.
And so you could just, like, you know, pirate one of those blank tapes and record on it. And I, you know, yesterday, like, kids today don't know what the struggle was.
They don't know the struggle.
But the same thing with, you know, I remember doing that with the VCR, and if a video came on that I loved on MTV, I'm like, and you'd sit there and you'd wait for, like, you know, I think it was at 5 o'clock MTV played the top 5 at 5 and wait. And
I didn't have MTV. I had to watch the Friday night videos if I could stay up until midnight.
Exactly, but still, I mean, you know that was, again, the struggle was real, kids. We suffered.
Kids today.
No, but I'm glad they have all of that, because they can move it around and, you know, look at it, and they have different entry points than we did, and it's so much, their access is so much greater that they can then do more with it. And I love that you say Dylan is looking at the culture in a way where he can, you know, just hit rewind and watch it again and really binge watch those things, and that might be the reason why he has so much of it at that point in his career. Plus, it, you know, it speaks to what he's interested in anyway. So I love that. Is there anything else you'd like to say about film noir? Do you want to talk about specific lines, or, I mean, you talked about Sam Spade and just. I
have to put a plug out there for Tempest. It's just.
I did say we could. You said I said I could talk about Tempest all day.
All day long.
Yeah. You know, I could tell those stories all day.
Every single song in that is just, you know, amazing. It's a little film noir. Every single video, especially though, like Tin Angel, which
I know. I'm going to read the quote from your book. It's a future Dylan revisits in Tin Angel on Tempest, which depicts a similar love that may be set in the American West, as Blackjack Davy suggests, or a film noir, or even The Palace at Mycenae, where Clytemnestra slaughtered her husband Agamemnon. That seems to be a thing for you upon his return to Troy. But I mean, it's great. So yeah, let's talk about Tempest. And so you say Tin Angel. dig down into it.
Sure. Well, it's got that ticking clock through it, and that's so noir. It's the same kind of rhythm as in like Lovesick, and it's just, you can feel the weight. Nothing changes; it just gets worse and worse and worse. And just like in Blackjack Davy, you have the woman running off with somebody else, with the stranger. But in Blackjack Davy, it's basically a little girl. It's actually kind of creepy. She's gonna be 15 and she's already a mother. Creepy. But this woman in Tin Angel is much older. She's a mature woman, but she's in the same place, and all three of them die because that's noir for you.
Right. It doesn't work out.
It doesn't work out for anybody. But all of the imagery, it comes like, it says, the first bullet grazed his ear, the second ball went right straight through. So like, is it a ball? Is it a bullet? It's, it can be set any time. He's got his cross-handled sword. It's just any old time. And even, Poe comes into it. There's a lot of Poe on that album anyhow. But you've got, he's a gutless ape, and why'd you make a monkey of me? I've seen just, it's Murders in the Rue Morgue, like all the way through. It's just so creepy. And I love it. And so actually when I was writing one of my books, Dark Heat, I have this character who's like this old fire-spitting prophet kind of guy. He's actually a drug dealer and quite evil, but he's always quoting the Bible, but always like the worst parts of it. And when I was writing that, I only listened to Tempest. Like for a year, it was the only thing I listened to.
Is it because it's so dark?
It's so dark, and the language is so elemental. I mean, you listen to that album, and it's all like 1 or 2 syllable words, and they're all so crisply told, but it's brutal, legs and arms and body and bone. It's just, you can just feel him like crunching on these, on bones. It's so brutal. It's cruel. It's not fun really, except I love it, and that's noir. It's brutal, it's bloody, it's just so elemental, and that's what I love about that album.
Do you return to that album often?
I do.
It's not one that I do that often, but now you're making, I listen to it in preparation of this, but especially because you said I could talk about Tempest all day. I was like, okay.
Sometimes I skip Tempest because my commute is only 10 minutes, and it's a 14-minute song, so I'm not going to be able to listen to it beginning to end. Right. And I can only listen in the car. Right. So.
That's right, because you live in a hostile household.
Exactly. Well, hostile maybe.
Too strong?
Too strong, because
unsupportive.
My wife is very supportive and actually lets me do all of my writing and concert going. Right. But I can't be blasting it through the big speakers.
Gotcha.
So
she may need the T-shirt that Roberta Ray Cove's husband, Michael, he likes Dylan, but he's not on the level. And he said, I'm going to make T-shirts that say I'm married into this.
That would be her.
Yeah.
But no, I do go back to Tempest a lot. I just love the language. I love the music, all of it. It's definitely one of my top 5 albums.
When we were, and I wouldn't get back to the noir, but when we were in France, we went to a small conference. That's where I met Jim Salvucci and Nina Goss and Anne-Marie Mai, but Christopher Ricks was there. And he gave his talk on Tempest. And I think that he didn't think, there were people who were presenters. It was a very small conference. And some folks didn't really care for it. And when we got back to the hotel, the elevator was very small, like the building that we're staying in right now. And David got on with him, and he and David hit it off. David, my partner, hit it off at dinner, and he got into the elevator, and Christopher Ricks said to him, I've made a bad mistake. I made a very bad mistake. And David said, what did you do? Like, I've had a bad day at work. And he talked to David about Tempest because it wasn't as well received. And I think that was just, it was already 2018, but I think it was a case of Dylan being ahead of us and us catching up to it, and Rick's kind of honing in on something.
As he does.
Yeah, I know Nina loved it. I thought it was a great presentation. And, at the time I wasn't as sold on Tempest as maybe I am now, 6 years later, but I just think it was so sweet. I made a terrible mistake. He said, I presented on a song nobody likes. I'm like, oh dear.
But he has a way of making you hear things that you didn't hear before.
Right.
Keith and I both took classes with him at BU.
Oh,
And
wow.
he taught us how to write. So, I think if you look at our book, you're not going to be able to tell who wrote what.
Right.
Because Christopher Ricks taught us both.
Right.
And I was just so happy to be able to give him that book and say, this is because you taught me and you taught Keith.
Right.
And now I'm giving this to you.
I bet he was so gracious.
Oh,
too.
he was. He's so good. He was like, which of my books do you not have? He said. And then handed me one. And I actually got to have a little revenge on him. When I was in college, I said, I went to him with an interpretation of Lily Rosemary and the Queen of Hearts. And I said, I think Big Jim is Lily's father. And he's like, no, absolutely not. That's completely wrong. But of course, we're writing a book. I can say whatever I want.
Right.
So that's in the book. And I went to him and I said, I got to tell you. And I told him that story. And he looked at me and he said, opposition is friendship. And then he handed me a book all about these poets who had been best friends and argued through poetry. And it was just the greatest thing.
What a beautiful moment to have with him. I think he's lovely.
He is.
Yeah. He invited, so after that was in December of 2018 where we met him, and then we were here for my cousin's wedding, and he invited me to have a chat with him at his office, and it was just he was so supportive and, encouraged me to write. And that was at a time that I was just getting back into writing about Dylan, and I think it was really foundational to where I am now, because he was so supportive, and I respect him so greatly. So I love that you have that experience with him. So in addition to lyrics, you talked about some images, but what about characters in Dylan's songs that fit noir? I love this idea of looking at characters in Dylan's songs.
I mean, there are so many people running around. I love, the movie aspect of, say, Black Diamond Bay. And, you just have all of these characters running around, and it really reminds me of like Casablanca or something like that, and all these individual stories. That's not really noir, but it's the first thing I think of when you say that.
It's a film influence.
It's definitely film.
And I wrote in the notes, I think of the beautiful What Is It You Wanted from Shadow Kingdom, and I don't know why that feels like noir, but it just feels like this like heavy, it's just the way it's shot. I mean, it's black and white, but it just feels noirish, like he's just sort of this world-weary guy. Like,
sure, and you have all the men in the fedoras.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's all men in fedoras and only like 2 women in the entire place. It's definitely very noir.
Yeah,
there's something
the masculine energy of noir. So again, Michael Gray, back to Michael Gray. He argues that Dylan using quotes from film noir, particularly on Empire Burlesque, is another engagement with pop culture, but also notes the literary origins of many of the scripts. And I think this is perfectly suited for you as a lit teacher. So what do you make of this? It's a broad question, and you can talk about whatever you want.
Well, I actually did write an article about this, about how he takes from so many film noir, but how many of those are from books. And
no plug for Faulkner there.
Oh, exactly. I look at like James M. Cain and things like that, and there are lines that just seem to come right out of Postman Always Rings Twice.
Right.
And a lot of those lines are lines that were lifted from the book into the movies. They weren't original to a screenwriter, those kinds of things. So I think Dylan does have this idea of something on the page, and bringing it to life. You mentioned the line earlier about how his songs aren't meant to be read. You got to hear him song, just like Shakespeare's supposed to be on the stage, not on the page. But he does have this idea, I think, that it's on the page that it's going to last. The recordings might disappear, but the printed word will always be there. And I think that's that immortality that we're all looking for.
And he does have, special affection for his high school English teacher, and so there seems to be a respect for that. And he writes about Faulkner in Chronicles that I love. He's like, I tried to get into what Faulkner was doing, and I'm like, interesting, because there's that film noir connection as well.
Sure, and he, in Chronicles, he's talking about that library that can't possibly have been a real library in people's house, and he's not going through all of their vinyl. He's not going through their 78s.
Right.
He's going through their books, and clearly he's a deep, deep reader. I mean, some of the things that I've seen on is it Dylan like where they look at the changes of lines and in his live performances, and he's pulling from these obscure books.
Right.
They're not movies, they're not songs, they're obscure books. Where the hell does he find them? But he does.
But just also the connection that he has, with the beat poets and showing up at Archibald MacLeish and just like showing up at people's houses that that are writers and great writers that he respects. So there's definitely you're right. He has a connection to the written word and maybe the permanence of it. Using the Odyssey, of course, there's definitely that. But do you think, now he's got the Nobel Prize for Literature, so,
And what did he talk about in his speech but 3 books? And so, he barely talks about music.
Right.
In, was it 18, 20 minutes or so, he gives cliff notes of 3 books.
He plagiarizes.
Well, that's what Joni Mitchell would say.
Right.
I think more he appropriated. He refracted.
He collaged.
That's a great word.
Right.
Because, especially in the age of the internet, you can't expect to get away with that kind of thing. He's not, running it through ChatGPT or something.
No.
He's expecting that you're going to find it.
I think that's a good point.
And that's another thing against Michael Gray. It's like he's not deliberately stealing or plagiarizing if he expects you to find it. And that's what he leaves you a clue and you got to go follow.
Right. So he's making you work for it. I love that. All right, so is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
I don't think so.
I
want to get that. I could talk about my new novel. Sure,
a little bit. Let's talk about it. Yeah.
It's like 5 pages long. I've just gotten it started.
Okay, but still,
but
it's more than 0 pages.
It's more
long.
than 0 pages. It's another Greek myth, and I'm not going to say which one, but I will say that I do have a character in a bar, and a person from the corner does approach him for a match. And things are going to go very, very badly. Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
So, I don't know if I'm going to find a Dylan album yet that's going to kind of inform it.
Okay.
But, that's what happens. In my last one, everything goes wrong, but there's one little girl who gives somebody a rainbow. And, it's just, I love that image. I don't know how many times I'd heard that song before I realized there's only one positive image in the entire song.
I don't know that I've ever thought of it in those terms either.
Everything is horrible, except I met a little girl, she gave me a rainbow.
Does that connect though to the end? I'll know my song well before I start singing, because to me that it's the before I start singing, you have to learn this stuff, but there's an afterword to it, so it's hopeful.
That's true. That's why people write. No matter how bleak something is, even in noir, we write because we have hope.
But you're right, all the images he shows us that are external, not what he's doing, that's the only positive one.
But he's got that rainbow.
That's beautiful.
And, that's the covenant, right? The promise that things are going to be okay.
Right. That's amazing.
Let's hope.
All right, so one final question,
sure.
And there may be a delay in when this drops, but you're going to see Dylan in a few days, and we try not to bring our expectations. We are not foolish enough. I saw him in Memphis on Good Friday, and I was like, I really hope he plays a gospel song, and I was like, don't do that to yourself, and he didn't, but it was still a great show, but I really was hoping for a gospel song.
For years I would go with my friend Matt, and I would say, I just hope he sings all 4 verses of Like a Rolling Stone.
Okay.
And for 20 years he didn't. And Matt always laughed at me. It's like, he's not going to do it. And I don't know, I think it was maybe in 2018. I think it was that show. And, the notes come on, and he looks at me and he's like, don't even think it. And he played it. He played I think he did it by accident, but he played all 4 verses. So I don't even make guesses anymore.
Right.
I'm glad he's not doing all Rough and Rowdy Ways things. I saw that, it was awesome.
Yes.
But I love the fact that he's going back and pulling out bizarre old songs that you never thought he would play again. And so I just know it's going to be great, whatever it is.
And I think last week we were a little premature to think he's going to change the set list.
Well, 3 nights in a row, right?
I know, but now he seems to be playing more consistent set lists. They've fallen into a groove, which is great because I'd be happy to see him sing a menu. But I think, I was thinking, what expectations are you bringing, if any? I'd love to see him play harp a little bit more.
I hear he's doing that.
Yes.
So that will be fun. It would be nice to see him play guitar.
Yeah. I don't know if the arthritis will allow him to, though.
I don't think so.
Right.
I think, but he played, what was it, with the Heartbreakers last summer.
Yeah.
And wow, he was amazing then.
Yeah.
But whatever he's willing to give us.
I will take anything that he's willing to give us. Well, is there anything else we want to talk about?
We could go on forever, but
I know we could. I think
there's always something new, and that's what's so great about Dylan, right?
Yeah.
Like all of us obsessives, we all obsess about something different.
Yes.
And we can go on forever, and I hope we do.
And I think sharing that with each other helps us, like you said, put the threads together to see a more comprehensive picture of Dylan, or tapestry, which is just beautiful. I'm so grateful that you made the trip into the city today to see me, to talk with me. This has been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been so much fun.
Talk with you more about your work, and I will put everything in the show notes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, so people can get more of your work and see how to find you. And you're not on social media, are you?
I am. I'm on Facebook.
Okay.
And I do have a website as JM Radosta, like JM Taylor.
Okay.
It's him getting my own. I'm like Superman, Clark Kent. I'm Super Kent or whatever. But anyhow, I do have that website.
Right.
I just don't get on too often.
Okay, so we'll let people know how to find you. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.
Well, that's another episode of Infinity Goes Up on Trial. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking with John, and look for the next episode to drop on the 1st of the month. Thank you.